Good afternoon. Today is the 20th July 2013. My name is JoyDoreen Biira. Welcome to KTN Africa Speaks. Now, of course, today we've got quite a lot lined up for you on every issue regarding Africa. And we're going to start now by taking a look at Web City to let you know what's happening across the continent and what's making news, and also what you're saying about it. Let's not forget, though, that there's something strange that happened in Zimbabwe, where President Robert Mugabe said that if he's actually going to get all the homosexuality or the gay community in Zimbabwe and, you know, put them together, and if they cannot conceive, then they're going to be in trouble. And well, this has made headlines across the African continent, which definitely has iked people the negative way. But let's take a look at what's making more news around the African continent. July 18 marked Nelson Mandela's 95th birthday, with people around the world joining in to celebrate his birthday with quotes of inspiration shared across online platforms. Pictures of Mandela streamed across Twitter and Facebook show just how much Africa and the world revere a man that many freely refer to as hero. Nelson Mandela spent his 95th birthday in hospital in Pretoria as events took place around the world and in South Africa in his honor. Madiba's health condition has since improved from critical but stable to encouraging. On Twitter, Hillary Clinton is reminded of a poem in a movie, Invictus, a poem Mandela used to recite in prison. "You're truly an unconquerable soul, Madiba. Happy 95th birthday." Norbert Mao from Uganda quoted, "It always seems impossible until it's done." And Sema from Somalia adds, "Because of Mandela, I can't complain. Because of Mandela, I can speak even louder. Because of Mandela, I can smile. And yes, I'm African." Now, on July 31st, Zimbabwe is due to hold its first presidential election in 6 years. It will be the first since the chaotic 2008 election and the first under the country's new constitution. But 89-year-old President Robert Mugabe is having sleepless nights. For the last few months, someone calling themselves Baba Jukwa has been posting damaging leaks from Mugabe's ZANU-PF party on a Facebook page. The anonymous Facebooker, whose page has been viewed over 1 million times with over 260,000 followers, has been leaking inside information about Zimbabwe's ZANU-PF party, prompting Robert Mugabe to offer $300,000 to anyone who hunts him down. He has reportedly appealed to China's technical expertise to hack the account or bring it down. Faha Tahir tweets, "So fascinating. Social media is transforming democracy. New forms of accountability in Zim." And well, that's it. And remember, you can also play part in letting us know what stories you're following so we can capture them on Web City here on Africa Speaks. It's now time for us to take a look at what you've been doing with your cell phones on our segment Click, that does capture some of the pictures and mini videos that you've taken using your cell phones. Take a look at this week's Click. On my way to work this morning, look what I captured on the road. This was just around Langata Road in Nairobi City, Kenya. Now that I leave to you to caption. Some have described it as the strongest car in the world. And also, we share with you moments of Nelson Mandela's birthday from across the world. People, both young and old, celebrated Nelson Mandela's birthday. And the corruption index was released days ago. And here is a cartoon shared, putting into perspective how children view corruption in Africa. Well, you're watching KTN's Africa Speaks, and in this part of the show that we call The Platform, we do delve into issues affecting the African continent, and it could be on the positive or on the negative. And this week we are paying attention to the African continent and how it's fared in regard to the corruption index or bribery index.
And Berlin-based Transparency International surveyed perceived levels of corruption among people in 107 countries, including 24 countries on the African continent. But here are some of the facts. In 11 African countries, more than half of those surveyed reported paying a bribe within the past year. Now, in countries like Liberia and Sierra Leone, more than 3/4 said they had paid a bribe. And asked which institutions were more corrupt, Africans often singled out the police, the judiciary, and political parties. In several countries, including Nigeria, Kenya, and Zimbabwe, more than 80% said police were affected by corruption. Now, the strong exception of these trends was Rwanda. According to researchers, 56% of Rwandans surveyed said corruption has greatly decreased in the last 2 years. Now let's just take a look at the numbers here on the wall. If you look at corruption in Africa, and if you look at the countries as well, if we could just go back to the top country right there, Sierra Leone is at 84%, and we have Liberia that comes in second place at about 75%. Now, on the African continent, not really looking at the worldwide index, on the African continent, Kenya comes in third place. Then we have Liberia, Cameroon, Mozambique, Zimbabwe that all had their corruption index at 62%. There you can actually say they did come in fourth place, but if you put it all together, you would actually realize that these countries are not doing well. And then we also have other countries. We have Uganda that is not faring too well as well at 61%. We have Senegal at 57%, and we also have Tanzania at 56%. And if you also look at, the most corrupt institutions as per country, if you look at Sierra Leone, which is the most corrupt in the world, they actually blame, or they say they've paid bribes to the police, and those who have done so are about 79%. Those who say the judiciary is corrupt are at 74%. We have the education systems at 64%. We have parliament at 53%. We have health services at 55%. Let's move on now to this, well, still looking at Sierra Leone, I guess, but now let's move on to Liberia. And in Liberia, which is the second most corrupt country on the African continent, they say Parliament takes it at 96%. Then we have the police at 94%. We have the judiciary at 89%. Well, this is quite alarming here. And we have education systems at 84%. We have business entities at 78%, which is quite different from other African countries. Now, if we go now to Kenya, which is the fourth, or takes the fourth position in the worldwide corruption index, and in Africa it will take the third position. Kenyans actually say that the police is most corrupt there. It takes about 95%. And then we have the legislature or parliament, which takes 68%. We have public officials who take up 59%. Then we have the judiciary at 58%. And we have political parties at 53%. And well, it's quite appalling here that you'd actually realize that religious bodies are increasingly getting corrupt, or religious bodies are increasingly taking bribes from their congregations. If you look at religious bodies in Liberia, I should say Liberia's religious bodies are the most corrupt on the African continent at 22%, and Sierra Leone is at 18%, and Kenya is at 15%. Now, we'll be getting back to these specific figures here in just a short while, but joining us now in studio is Professor James Kombo, who is the Deputy Vice Chancellor Academic Affairs at Daystar University and also a Professor of Theological Studies. Well, Professor, it's good to have you in studio.
Thank you so much, Joy.
It's such an honor. First of all, what do you think about the figures we just shared?
Well, the figures, to be frank, are extremely appalling.
Mm-hmm.
But it is interesting the way you have played it, because you started by featuring Mandela and Mandela's birthday.
Yes.
Now, thinking of Mandela and Mandela's birthday reminds us, of course, of the conscience, something about conscience. Mandela is celebrated across the world. Right. And just a while ago, we had a little clip from the United States,
mm-hmm.
And extremely strong statements there. If Mandela could do it, and if Mandela would win the amount and the magnitude of respect that
mm-hmm.
we see coming from across the world,
Right.
I think Africa still has hope.
Well, Africa does have hope, but when you look at the corruption index right
Yes,
there,
yes.
and if you look at the fact that 1 in 4 Africans have admitted to having taken bribes or paid bribes, what comes to your mind, you know?
Again, I would say that the picture is extremely bad. Again, just looking at the figures and the statistics as they have been played, Africa comes through as number 1 in corruption. Looking at the figures and the percentages that we have seen indicates some very, very bad things going on. And of course, when you begin to look at those figures and you begin to ask questions such as, what do these figures then mean? Then you are beginning to talk of issues such as development, you are talking of issues such as gender, you are talking of issues such as constitutionalism,
Right.
you are talking of things such as a people being human, being a people. Do you envision a situation where people are able to live as people and to do things as a people when these kind of statistics are being thrown out there? I would say no.
Right.
And perhaps
I just want to get to the part where
Yes.
this actually reflects quite a lot. I
Yes.
know Africa has come quite a long way. When you talk about colonization of the African continent by different powers, the French, the English, and to an extent you would actually attribute that to the Americans as of now. But then does this mean that Africa has failed institutions?
I wouldn't bring in colonization into the picture because when you look at Asia and the tiger economies, they went through similar historical experiences such as us.
Right.
You have had debates and various forms of analysis. Coming out in different media, talking about the extremely good performance from the tiger nations of Asia.
Right.
But these countries went through, similar, domination as the African people have gone.
Well,
so
similar domination, like you put it.
Yes.
Would now like to connect to the Executive Director for Transparency International Kenya, and that is Samuel Kimeu, who is here, right here to talk to us. Because the bigger question that everyone is asking is, how was this bribery index measured, or how was bribery and corruption measured in Africa? And Mr. Kimeu, if you can hear me, can you kindly let us know how corruption was measured in Africa? Can you hear me?
Well, it's basically people's experiences. So you get a respondent and you ask them which services they have sought over the last 12 months, and ask them whether they experienced any bribery situations as they sought those services, whether any bribes were required of them in order to access that service. And depending on the number of people who have reported having being asked to pay a bribe or having paid a bribe, then you can add that up and do percentages depending on the number of services that we've considered.
Well, there we go. Professor, if you heard what Mr. Kimeu just mentioned, he actually said that they did ask people what services they have received in the past year, and which ones they have received the most, and how easy was it to access those services. So in this case, one would actually wonder, when dealing with corruption and when dealing with issues to do with bribery, how do African countries work towards solving the problem?
Joy, this I think is the most important question that as a continent and as a people we got to deal with, the question of how. But looking at some of the experiences, such as the ones we have seen, I was able to look at the data, and it was very interesting to see that one of the East African countries is actually doing very well. I mean, Rwanda.
Yes.
One of the questions that we would need to, and the good thing is that Rwanda is within easy proximity. It is part and parcel of the East African region at the moment. It would be very good for us to ask questions such as, Rwanda, how did you go about it? How comes you're beginning to be an example?
And one thing that is actually surprising is the fact that we have a country like South Sudan, whose corruption index is at 39%. And it's just a new country, that just had its first independence, this year, or this month for that matter. And then when you look at a country like Rwanda that has been around for quite some time, and their corruption index is at 13%, one wonders exactly how they weighed the corruption or bribery index.
Exactly, and I think as we have heard, I want to believe that the whole process was definitely scientific. That the various indicators that were recalled or that were brought into play, gave them the indicators as reflected. But I think it probably may not necessarily be how long have you been a nation, because how long have you been a nation can also reflect on the question of institutions.
Well, I would also like to hear your view regarding religious bodies. If you looked at the figures we just showed you there, Liberia's religious bodies seem to be the most corrupt at 22%. Then we also have Sierra Leone that had about 18%, and Kenya comes in at 15%. So what does this tell us about religious bodies as of today as opposed to before?
Definitely. Of course, the statistics are indicating that the religious bodies are not doing well, and that religious bodies may need to get back to themselves and begin to ask the question, what is it that we are doing and that we are not doing right? I think research even amongst the religious bodies themselves indicate that there is a seeming shift, a shift away from focus on things that have to do with the doctrine, things that have to do with belief, and so forth, to a utilitarian types of things, which will deal with things such as how much do you own, how well do you look, those types of things, miracles and those, wealth, health, types of stuff.
Well, hold that thought right there, Professor, as we cross over to Mr. Kimeo once again, so that he can give us an insight on what he thinks about, religious bodies. I mean, how exactly, Mr. Kimeo, if you can hear me, how exactly did you weigh bribery amongst religious bodies? Mr. Kimeo, if you can hear me?
Well, this study has not gone into finding out exactly the nature of bribery that affected the religious sector, but we do note that if you compare these results in 2013 from the results in 2010, it is true that there is an increase in people who have experienced, who report having experienced bribery touching on religious institutions. And it could very well just be a reflection of the general state of integrity in the states that we are looking at. Churches and religious organizations, for that matter, operate within a social context. And if that social context has a prevalence of vices or lapses of integrity, then chances are that you will find that permeating in every sector of the society. And I think the religious sector in this case has not been spared.
Well, the religious sector has not been spared, and this does not really portray a good picture when it comes to the fact that people go to church, and when they go to these religious bodies, they're going to them because they actually think that they are holier than thou. And if we're going to see corruption amongst religious bodies, what does this tell us as an African continent?
Well, I agree that religious bodies have not done very well, and the statistics actually are there, showing the status of things in as far as the religious bodies are concerned. But having observed that, I think it is also important to delink the practices of individuals and how people are appearing to be responding to the situations as they appear, and the actual faiths and what these faiths actually represent. Does these mean that people are beginning to move away from the standards and the expectations of the faith? Is it a statement on the status of the faith itself? And I would say no. The faith, in terms of its status, has been constant over the centuries. But people have come and gone over the years. And as my fellow commentator has just said, we are part and parcel of a society. We are an open society.
Right.
Religious entities are open societies. And therefore, what happens in the society in some way percolates into the various sectors of the society, whatever they may be. But I would hasten to say that it is a bad situation, and religious leaders and those who subscribe to various faiths need to take stock.
Well, let's take a look at what some of you are saying here at, on Twitter and on the various social media platforms. We're having one called Kapiri, and you're saying political patronage, greed, and weak institutions are sources of corruption in Africa. And we also have Joe Saidi, who is saying, looking at the stats, corruption is the alpha and omega in Africa. And we also have Anthony Nyasimi, who is saying cultures of anti-colonial and anti-apartheid movements have spawned corruption on the African continent. And well, if I just might read one more, we're having Kamau Charles is saying, it's sad that religious institutions are appearing on the same sentence as corruption. And also Johnson Derry is saying extent of corruption is in a nation is directly proportional to the size of the state. Well, and as we have actually been looking at the fact that this week we've been celebrating Mandela and celebrating his life, and of course the fact that he had his 95th birthday this 18th of July. Well, it's quite a lot of inspiration that we get from him. But as somebody who's probably in his evening days, but a man that many actually do call a hero. And looking at the statistics that Transparency International released, with many African countries still battling corruption, you could actually say that one would evaluate the life of Mandela and put into perspective the African continent and whether or not we actually pick lessons out of his life. And would like to wind up today's show by sharing a message that was drawn by the Standard newspaper cartoonist that is Gams, and we all know him. I'm sure we do read or we do watch more of his drawings in the Standard newspaper. And well, we're actually winding up with that just to pay tribute to a man that not only Africa but the entire world does revere as a hero. And well, those of you who know him, his real names are Eric Ngamau, and this time round he's actually giving us the insight of what Nelson Mandela was all about and what more we can actually share from him. So right behind me here is a portrait or a drawing of Nelson Mandela as we celebrate his 95th birthday. And if you take a look right here, it's basically "Get Well Soon" that is inscribed in there, and happy birthday to Africa's greatest selfless leader. This was coming in from Gams of the Standard newspaper here in Nairobi, Kenya. Well, he actually brings us to the end of today's show and would like to say thank you so much. Remember, you can also do just like Gams did. You can send us pictures, you can send us mini videos of what you think about Nelson Mandela. This entire month, we're going to be celebrating Nelson Mandela's life and the moments and quotes as well as inspirations that we draw from his life. So remember, you can take part in this. You can draw us something or you can send us pictures. But I would also like to say thank you so much to our guests who appeared today on the show. That is Samuel Kimeu, the Executive Director for Transparency International Kenya, and also Professor James Kombo, who is the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at the Daystar University and also Professor of Theological Studies. And well, we come to the end of the show right now. Thank you all for watching, and remember, this conversation continues on Twitter, on Facebook, and all the other social media platforms. You can tweet me at JoyDoreen Biira or our Africa Speaks Twitter handle, that is at KTN Africa Speaks. On Facebook, you can get us, Africa Speaks, and we'll be so glad to hear from you. From me and the rest of the team here at KTN, thank you all for watching. Good afternoon, and God bless.